Awesome. Welcome to day 9 Foundation Programming. I do sincerely apologize for the delay this evening. I had a family emergency, but I'm here now. Uh, you know, Thankfully Brandon was able to pick up the slack where I fell short. But we're gonna go ahead and pick up today's lesson by reviewing the line segment. How long have you guys been working on it? For the most part, is everyone close to finishing it, or are they done?
Getting close, not quite done.
Very close.
Okay. Let me go ahead and pull it up while you guys kind of wrap up your last minute touches, and then we'll do a walkthrough about what it's supposed to look like. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and start off the code along. I encourage for you guys to walk through it with me if you're not complete. Stop me at any point if you guys have any questions. I think it's some direct messages about the assignment. So I'm sure there's certain parts where you guys probably got stuck at. Do bear with me because it's been a while since I touched up on this assignment. I usually tend to kind of go over the assignment that we're going to cover before the class, but as you may know today, I didn't have the ability to. So I'm gonna go ahead and read through the assignment and kind of code along and dissect the problem itself. Right. So are you guys all able to see my VS Code? Awesome. I saw a head nod from Gary. All right. So essentially we have to create a class named Point that has 2 data members. And honestly, Guillermo did a great job at the way that he worded the readmes. They're kind of like it goes in chronological order, so you're able to kind of code from the top of the instructions. You just work your way down. So we're gonna just go ahead and start jumping straight into the code. So we're gonna create a class named Point. So class Point, and it has 2 data members, right? So an X coordinate and a Y coordinate, representing the 2 coordinates of the point. So we have to define our init method so we can initialize it. They've taken 2 parameters, I would assume. Yeah, so it takes in 2 arguments, the X and Y coordinate in that order, and uses them to initialize the 2 data members. So we'll pass in the X and the Y in that order, and then we can go ahead and actually assign it to our data members. So X coord is equal to X, self dot underscore Y coord is equal to Y, right? The get methods for the 2 data members should be get X coord and get Y coord. So after our init method has been declared, we're going to create our getter methods. So we'll define get X coord, which will take in self, and it should return to us the data member self dot underscore X coord, right? Very straightforward. Just our typical getter method, so we can access the data members without allowing them to directly manipulate the data. And then same thing for the Y coordinate. All right, so we have our 2 get methods. Next, we have to create a method named distance2 that takes a point object as an argument, and it returns the distance between the point object. Okay, the method is called on. So whatever object that calls this method, it should return the distance from that one. And the point object passed as the argument, right? So a point object should be able to use this and take in another object to grab the distance between both of them, right? So we're gonna go ahead and define that. So define distance 2. Like everything else, is going to take in self, and we know it's supposed to take in a point object. So we're going to go ahead and do point object. Now, I'm sorry, my mic just made a weird noise. Can you guys still hear me? Awesome. Okay, so the math for that, right? We have a formula that was given to us, thanks to Guillermo, and it's the distance formula.png. So here we know that D is going to stand for distance, right? And I personally suck at math. I've mentioned this over and over again, but we'll dissect that problem one piece at a time. So we'll do the X and the Y and then the overall scope of it, right? So essentially we have to get, we see X2 and X1 and then Y2 and Y1, right? So what does this mean, right? So it's grabbing 2 different points, and we know it's 2 different points because the number that's underneath the Y and the X represents the individual point. So we see here that we grab the X coordinate of 1 point, and we're subtracting that from the X coordinate of the second point. And we do the exact same thing on the Y coordinate, right? We grab the Y coordinate for 1 point, and we subtract that from the Y coordinate from another point. So let's do the X first and then the Y. So it should look something similar to this, where it's going to be distance is equal to, right? We know that we need to get the coordinate from the X coordinate from one object and the X coordinate from the object being passing here. So we'll start with the one that's calling it. So we'll do self dot underscore, because the a private data member, X coord. And we're gonna do plus self dot am I doing that correctly? Oh, it's minus. Is this the right one? Okay, it's minus. So it should be why did my example have plus? Where did I go wrong? All right, that's too easy. We'll do, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but should be something like self dot X coord minus point object dot get X coord, right? Were you guys on the same track? Okay, my example was absolutely wrong. I don't know what I was thinking last class, but I'm awake this class. All right, so we have self dot X coord, and then we're subtracting the object given to it. Let's just verify that's the correct order. The one in front of the dot and then the point object pass, that's the argument. Okay. So if point 1 and point 2 are both point objects, and point 1 dot distance 2.2 should return distance between point 1 and point 2. Did you guys do it in that same fashion where you called self dot X coord as well? All right. And I'm telling you guys, I suck at math, man. I don't even recognize this formula. I've been out of high school for years. So we'll do X coord from the self minus the X coord from the point object. And that itself should be to the second power, right? So it should look something like asterisk, asterisk, and 2, right? That should be the first part of that. Let's kind of put this distance formula here on the right side. All right, so we have the first part. We're doing the subtraction there. And then let's wrap this bad boy in parentheses as well. This right here is the entire first part from this parentheses to the second power. Now we need to do something very similar for the Y coordinate. So it should look like this, where it's going to be self dot Y coordinate minus point object dot get Y coord, right? And then that needs to be wrapped around parentheses again, because we have to put this bad boy to the power of 2. So it should look like that. right? So once again, to recap, let's kind of stretch this out a little bit so we can see the overall scope of it. So we did the initial math for the x coordinate from one object, and then from the object given to it, we subtracted from each other, and then we did the second power. That itself is all held within this initial parentheses. And then we did the exact same thing, but for the y coordinate. Now we have to grab that, all of that, and then just get the square root of it, right? So we're gonna go ahead and wrap this all up in parentheses as well. So we'll grab the entirety of that formula, and we already know to get the square root, we've done before in other problems, is the asterisk 0.5. That gives us the square root. Now, if we did this correctly, right? And if my high school math teacher is seeing this, they might be proud, right? I didn't turn out to be a failure. So let's go ahead and move forward. So we got the distance for that. And at the end of it, it should just return distance, right? Return distance. Okay. So we got the method named distance2. All right. The distance formula.png, formula for distance between 2 points, where d is a distance in the 2 points, or x1 and okay, and y1. That's weird. Okay, no, that's not weird. That's exactly right. The above formula requires taking the square root. As you might recall, you can just use the exponent, correct? For example, the result, yep. All right. So now we have to write a class named line segment that has two data members, one being endpoint 1 and one being endpoint 2, representing two endpoints of the line segment, right? It should have an init method that takes 2 point objects as arguments and uses them to initialize the two data members. The endpoints of, okay, all right. So let's go ahead and create that class. It's gonna look like this. We're gonna be class line segment. We're going to initialize it with our init method, give it self, and we're gonna do endpoint 1 and endpoint 2. All right, and then we assign it to our data members. Endpoint 1 is equal to endpoint 1. And then endpoint 2 is equal to endpoint 2. Right, very straightforward. It should have a get method for the two data members, get endpoint 1 and get endpoint 2. Very similar to our get x and y coordinate. Get endpoint 1 self, return self dot underscore endpoint 1. And then do 1 for endpoint 2. Awesome. So far, so good. All right. So we got the get methods. Next is a method named length that takes no arguments and returns the distance between its two endpoints. This can make use of the points distance to method, right? So we're going to go ahead and define that. It's going to be define length, takes no arguments. And then we want to return the distance. So we can do self dot endpoint 1, right? Remember, these are objects. Maybe it would have made it easier if I put endpoint 1 object or something like that, endpoint object 1, endpoint object 2, but these are objects, right? We're essentially passing an instance of this class point. So these points should have the dot distance to method. So we can go ahead and use the dot distance 2, and then pass in an object, because that's what we declare within our method, right? It takes in a different object. And this will be self dot underscore endpoint 2, right? And this returns the distance to this, and then we want to return it from this method, right? Now, that should conclude it, right? After that, we have to create a method named isParallel2 that takes a line segment object as an argument. And it returns true if the line segment that method is being called on is parallel to the one being passed as the argument. Otherwise, it should return false. For example, if line seg 1 and line seg are both line segment objects, then okay. All right, I do not have this on my notes, so we're gonna have to code this from scratch. It's gonna be called isParallel2. it takes a line segment object as an argument. So line segment object. It returns true. The line segment that method is being called on is parallel to the one being passed. Well, we have a formula for that, right? Do we? You
Yeah, it's
calculate
the other PNG. It's the one you were bringing up before accidentally.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my mic was like my headphone was like super loud. It takes in y2. Have two different points, 0.1 and 0.1. I'm sorry, 0.1 and 0.2. So we should be able to grab the x and y from each one of those. So here is another formula. Let's go ahead. Let me just code this out right here so I kind of see the instructions. It should look something like y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So I should be able to grab the line segment object. Each one has a point. So let's go with we can go with endpoint 1x. I'm just gonna start coding things out so we can kind of visualize it. So let's work with endpoint 1 first. So endpoint 1 and its x should be something like line segment object, right? And we should be able to grab the first endpoint by using get endpoint 1, right? This will return the endpoint. Actually, let's make it even simpler. Endpoint 1 is equal to line segment object dot get endpoint 1, right? Let's do that. Endpoint 2 is equal to line segment object dot get endpoint 2, right? So we can kind of visualize what we're doing. We know that line segment has 2 points in it, right? It's part of this data number. So we want to grab the points that this specific line segment has. Actually, we don't even, does it take in a line segment? It does take in a line segment. So it's an object, it's a line segment object grabbing a line segment object and grabbing its endpoints. Okay, so we can say, because both of these line segments should have 0.1 and 0.2, correct? Right, because this one is going to be calling this is parallel to method, and we're passing an entire different line segment object within it. So it should have a second endpoint 1 and a second endpoint 2, right? If we want to grab the current endpoint that we have right now, it would just be self dot underscore endpoint, right? Because we would be calling it within this class. And I guess that's what we have to check. But otherwise, you return false. For this method, you'll calculate slopes of two line segments and compare them. All right. Remember that you shouldn't test two floats for exact equality. Okay. Am I getting confused here? Or am I on the right track? What do you guys think?
Are we gonna have to run that line segment object through point class to get the X and the Y coordinate?
This one? We should not, right? So this is a line segment object itself, right? So it should have a start point and an end point, right? And then we're passing in a different line segment object within here. This line segment object has its own start and end point.
But each point has an X and a Y coordinate,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, and I guess that's where I feel like I'm getting confused here because we have. So we would have to use this formula on both line segments.
Yes.
Right? So we would have to do something similar to line segments to slope, something like that, right? Is equal to whatever this formula is, and we run it with its specific endpoints. And we would have to do something for the current one. Line segment segment 1 slope is equal to, okay. All right, I think we're on the right track here. So we need to grab the current slope of line segment 1, which is the segment itself that's calling it. And then we have to grab the slope for the line segment we're passing within here. And then if they're similar, they should be parallel. If I'm correct. I don't remember. Right? So essentially within line segment 1, let's take care of that one first. Let's move the endpoints for the line segment 2 down here so we don't get confused with that one. Right? Let's remove this. Actually, let's remove all this. All right, let's grab line segment 1 slope first. All right, and we can grab line segment 1 slope by just using the self._endpoint. So it should be, we're gonna do the y's and the x first. So the y for this line segment will be, it should be self.endpoint2 dot get y chord, right? So self dot, why is it giving me an error? Oh, because I didn't add self within the method. Rookie mistake, right? You gotta grab its first or the second yx, right? Or the y coordinate. So we have two endpoints here, endpoint 2 and endpoint 1, right? Let's grab the y for endpoint 2 first by using self._endpoint_2 dot get y coordinate. And then we're gonna subtract the y coordinate for endpoint 1. So self._endpoint1 dot get y coordinate. Right? This is the y coordinate for both endpoint 1 and endpoint 2 of the initial line segment that's calling this. It subtracts it. Let's put these in parentheses. And then we have to divide this by the x2 and x1, right? So this should be self._endpoint2 dot get x coordinate. Actually, we have to do that? We don't really have to do that because it's a data point within here. So we don't even need to do the get y coordinate, right? Because this is the segment that's calling it, right? If this segment is initially calling it, that's going to be line segment 1. Then we don't need to use get endpoint 1 or get endpoint 2 because we can access the data member within the method, right? So this should just be endpoint 2, endpoint 1. This should be endpoint 2.
But I'm confused because isn't endpoint 2 an XY coordinate?
You're
So you can't
correct.
track that.
I just saw
you were-
my mistake. You are right. These are objects. I forgot. These are objects. So we do need to use the get x coordinate and get y coordinate. Absolutely correct. Okay, thank you for that correction. So we do need it. Okay, because that's why I should have put object here. Let's go ahead and put object because I would get confused just like I did now. Right? This should be an object. Right, and that's the importance of naming conventions, right? Because once you start getting very complex, you have different data members, you have objects being passed into other classes. It's very easy to kind of get lost within your names. You forget what's supposed to be an object, what's supposed to be a dictionary, what it's supposed to be a list. But by having proper naming conventions, you avoid that confusion. X object, okay, X chord minus self._endpoint 1 object dot get x chord. All right, it looks a little lengthy, all right, unfortunately, due to the fact of our naming conventions, right? But essentially, this line segment has two objects within its init method that are saved as data members, right? And these objects, they all have their own X and Y coordinate. So to grab the X and Y coordinate, we need to use the built-in method that are in these objects, right? We're doing first the Y coordinate, and then we did the X coordinate second. So essentially after that, that should give us the slope, right? For that initial line segment. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing for the line segment object that's being passed within here. So this should be line segment object dot get endpoint 2. Yeah, get endpoint 2. Right, that's gonna grab the endpoint 2 that the line segment object is being passed in here. And then we have to do get X chord, right? Because that line segment has a data member, which is an object, right? And that object has an X coordinate. I know it's getting very confusing here, right? It's getting very confusing. We're having to dive in between objects and objects within an object. But that's going to grab the X coordinate for that endpoint within this line segment object. All right, and then we're going to subtract line segment object dot get endpoint 1 dot get X chord. Right? That takes care of the bottom part. Let's do the Y. So we'll put this in parentheses. Right? This has to be divided. And now let's do the Y. It should be line segments. Once again, object dot get Y chord dot, no, not get Y chord, get endpoint 1. Get, actually it's endpoint 2, right? Because it's endpoint 2 minus endpoint 1. So get endpoint 2 dot get Y chord minus line segment object dot get endpoint 1 dot get Y chord. Right, put that in parentheses. And we got the formula for these the object being passed in here, right? We grab its endpoints, we grab their X and Y coordinates, and then we subtracted them per the formula. And then let's kind of test it out. Before we move any forward, right, before we even see if is parallel is working, I want to see what the line segment 1 slope is giving me in return, as well as line segment 2, right? So at the very end, I'm just gonna go ahead and do print line segment 1 slope and then line segment 2 slope, right? Okay, cool. Are a lot of you guys lost about what we just did?
I am.
Yeah, it got very confusing, right? It got confusing because line segment is an object within itself, right? It's an object, right? And this object has two data members, which are both objects, right? And both of these objects have their own data members, which is their X and Y coordinate, right? And then it has a method called isParallel2, which is taking another line segment object, which, by the way, this line segment object also has two data members, which is endpoint 1 object and endpoint 2 object, right? Which is their own objects. And by the way, these endpoint objects also have their own X and Y coordinate. So essentially what we had to do is dive into both of these objects of line segments, right? The initial line segment that's calling the method, and then the line segment object that's being passed in within as an argument, right? We had to go between each line segment, grab both of their endpoint objects that they have as data members, and then after we grab those objects, we have to grab the X and Y coordinate of these endpoint objects, right? So it was like diving deep into the objects that are being passed within it and grabbing the data members of those objects, right? And that's probably where it gets confusing, where it essentially just becomes like objectception, right? It's just diving very deep into object within an object within an object. Let's kind of test it out. Let's try this. And see how that works. All right, we're gonna use a demo to see what the points are creating before we even move any forward. CD FOP. We're gonna break it down one by one class at a time, one method at a time, to make sure that we are on the right track here. CD line segment. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and do Python line segment.py. All right, so we created points, but let's go ahead and print out point 1 and point 2 just to make sure they are objects. All right, it's creating the objects. Awesome. What did we do? It's getter methods, right? We can do get X cord. And then for point 2, we'll do dot get Y cord. Right? Let's run that. Awesome. It's returning what it should, right? It returned the X coordinate for point 1. And then for point 2, we return the Y coordinate. So those are working. Now we're going to check the length method, right? So we're going to go ahead and do print. I'm sorry, not the length method. That's not one we're using. Let's use a distance one, right? This is the one that compares 2 points, right? It takes in, it uses a point to call upon another point. So we'll do point 1 dot distance 2. And then we're going to pass in it a point 2 object and see how that works, right? It gave us a funky number, but it's grabbing the distance from one or the other. Does anyone know off the top of their head if this is correct? No. Well, the math might not be right. I mean,
That is correct, I think.
I would say it is. We use the formula as we should. Point is, it's taking 2 different points and it's doing some math in this bad boy. So whether the formula is correct or wrong, we're making 2 objects kind of work together. We'll call that a success, right? Now, the next part was creating a line segment, right? And line segments takes 2 different points as data members, right? And we just created those points. So we can say line segment 1 is equal to, and then we're going to call the class line segment, and we'll pass in our point 1 objects and our point 2 object, right? Let's go ahead and print out our line segment to make sure it is working. And it does give us that hash, which it is, line segment object. It created our line segment object. Awesome. Now, what did we do? Get in point 1 and get in point 2. Can we print that out? Right? Get in point 1. Line segment object has no attribute. Okay, so it's not working. The method get in point 1 does not want to work. Oh, that's because we changed the name of our data members, right? We never updated it within here. It was supposed to return the object data member, but we never updated this. So let's go ahead and update it to make sure it's all the correct naming convention. And there we go. We go print out and we see it does return a point object. So it was able to grab the object that was assigned within this data member. So we know it did successfully save the point objects in there. We can even do get point object 2 to ensure that one's in there too. And it is, right? The hash is different, so we know it's in 2 different locations, 2 different objects. Awesome. It's working so far up to this point. Now let's check the length method. So we're gonna do line segment dot length, and this takes no arguments. but it's going to compare the objects that has saved within this data members, right? Which is the first point object we have here and the second point object. It's going to check the length between both of these. And we run it, and it's doing what it should do, right? Because what is the length method doing? It's using the distance to method that was pre-built into our points. So it's working. We see that it gave us the initial response that we got when we manually ran it on line 41, where we did 0.1 dot distance to 0.2. Awesome. Now is the next difficult part, which is the slope. We didn't create a slope method, did we? It's telling us to use a slope method. And that's probably where we went wrong, you know? We decided to do the whole slope functionality all within is parallel to, but it looks like here on the example, they used line seg1 dot slope. They created a method called slope, right? So a method named slope that takes no arguments, return the slope of the line segment. That's probably why our code looks a little too confusing. So let's create that slope method. So define slope, right? It takes no arguments, but it returns the slope of the line segment. So this should look something like this. Line return slope. Or no, we don't have to return anything here or give it any weird name. It should just have the functionality of self dot endpoint to object dot get y coordinate. It should just have this initial formula that we pre-built for whenever the line segment calls upon itself. And then we can use that to our advantage, right? Essentially what we would do is, and we see here, there's an issue, right? Because it's not understanding what the endpoint to object is. And why is it not doing that? Okay, I think it's because we removed the parentheses. There, we should not have any more issues. So I removed the parentheses so it wasn't tracking how the formula should be working. Let's put parentheses right here. So that's wrapped around there. Okay, and then this should be its own thing as well. Should be a parentheses right here. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I deleted parentheses, so it was giving me an error. But this is the initial formula that we created, right? The line segment has a method called slope, where it grabs its endpoints, right? Which were essentially point objects, and it grabs the x and y of each of these point objects and figures out the slope. So essentially, instead of doing both of the slopes on the is parallel to, we create a method that does that for us. So here, line segment one slope should be as simple as get slope or just slope, right? So line segment one slope should be dot slope, or honestly it should be self dot slope. Self dot slope, it'll grab the slope that belongs to this line segment it's calling it. So it could be line segment 1 is equal to self dot slope. And then line segment 2 will do something very similar. But instead of self, it's going to use the line segment object name, right? Because that's a line segment dot slope, right? So both of these are returning slope for its individual line segment. And then all we should do is kind of just print both of them out, right? It's supposed to return true or false, but I want to see what that looks like. Right, so let's create our
Roger,
Mike.
question. In
Answer.
that, on the slope formula, will you scroll back up?
Of course.
Okay, aren't you already using both of the objects in that slope
So
for the formula?
yes, but remember, each line segment has two objects. Right? Each line segment has two objects, both an endpoint 1 and then endpoint 2, right? So the
Yeah.
slope formula uses its individual endpoints to grab the slope, right? So line segment 1 is going to grab its own slope, right? That's whatever the line segment that's calling this method, it's going to grab its own slope. And then it's supposed to take in a separate line segment object as an argument. So we still got to get the slope for that one. But because
So-
it's a line segment object, it still has the dot slope method. Continue.
So the line segments are supposed to have two objects then each. That's what you're
Correct.
saying.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Now I get it, because at first when I was reading it, I was thinking, like, if it's already using X and Y, and if I already got 2, where the heck am I getting the other one from? But now I
Yeah.
see it's okay. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, so that takes care of that. Let's go ahead. We got line segment 2. Let's do the slope for the line segment. All right, so line segment 1 dot slope. Did it work? We did get something, right? It's doing math. I don't know if the math's correct, but it's doing math, right? So I am able to get the slope for line segment 1. Now let's create a second line segment. We have the code for it right here, which has its own points, right? 0.3 and 0.4. It then creates a line segment object, right? So this is the first line segment, right? Line segment 1. Each line segment is created by passing in 2 point objects, right? The first line segment took 0.1 and 0.2, both of these being objects. Then we create 2 other point objects, 0.3 and 0.4, right? Which we use to create our second line segment by passing in 0.3 and 0.4 into it, right? These are 2 different line segments, both of them having their own point object, right? Therefore, both of these have their own slope. So both of these should be able to call the line segment dot slope method, right? So this should be line segment 2 dot slope. And let's see how that works. Line segment 2 is not defined. Did I misspell it? I did misspell it. My bad. There we go. There we go. You see here, they both return a slope. Obviously, they're different, right? So more than likely, is parallel to, it should be false, right? Because they're not the same slope. Do you guys recall what slope is? I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence because I'm pretty dumb myself, right? But it's kind of like how it curves. So if they're not the same slope, that means they're not pretty much curving the same way. Am I correct? Am I stupid? There we go. The way they're like angled, I guess.
Just so, yeah, you're not stupid, you're brilliant. Just do
I'm
they look
trying
like
here.
this or do they look like this? You know,
Here, let me show you guys. My last FOP class, we didn't even get this far. Look at this. This is my notes from the last one. I create my own answer keys. I do my own. I run through every single problem that you guys do, but for some reason I never complete this one. I don't know why. Maybe due to time. So right now I'm writing off like the top of my head and trying to understand it as I read it through with you guys. So I do apologize for that. So all this is just off the top of my head, just trying to understand the instructions in the way that slope works. So you guys are watching how I code in real time, trying to understand the problem, dissect it, and take it step by step. But yeah, that's a lot, right? Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna kind of come back afterwards, try to take these next 10 minutes to decompress, and we will recap what we just talked about. Also, I have food here that I gotta eat, so I haven't ate all day. So I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and come back. So I acknowledge that's very confusing, right? Everything we just covered. So for those of you who are visual learners, we're gonna go ahead and do some like drawing. Well, I already did the drawing. You just have to look at it. So points 1, 0.2, 0.3, the very first class that we talked about, right, was the point class, right? Essentially, we had to create point objects. Looking at your code, we know that these objects, these point objects, took two data members, right? Two arguments as data members. That is the x coordinate and the y coordinate. Here I have a visual representation of the points that we had to create for this exercise, essentially, for the example, right? Point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 4, right? All four of these are objects, right? For every point that we created, we instantiated an object, right? We use the point class to create this point. The x1, y1, the x2, the y2s that we see in this formula is representing a specific x and y coordinate for an individual point. Notice that for point 1, we have x1 and y1, and for point 2, we had x2 and y2, right? A line segment takes 2 points, right? Essentially, we had a line segment is this, right? The point objects represents the start and the end points to create this make-believe line segment, right? Which is why the line segment took 2 objects as data members, right? Those points that it took as parameters or for arguments, those are its start and its end point. Which one is the start and end? It don't freaking matter, right? Just know that one starts it and one ends it. Whether you look at it from the back or the front, they're both points on each end, right? When we created line segment 1, right, we took a point 1 object and the point 2 object, right? That created our make-believe line segment object, right? Because if you look back at your line segment class, it has endpoint 1 and endpoint 2 as a data member, right? What were those? Those were objects. We passed in the exact same point 1 and point 2 that we had created earlier above in our code, and we passed it in within the line segment class to create a line segment object. So this object, this line segment object, is made of other objects. Make sense? We then created a second line segment, right? But what do we know about the line segment? We know that it needs 2 objects to be instantiated, right? These objects have to be points, right? So we created 2 other points, point 3 and point 4, and then we assigned it as data members, therefore giving us 2 line segments, essentially 2 lines with both of them having 2 points, a start and an end, right? Interchangeable, which one's which, it don't matter. But we had 2 points. When we went and we did the slope formula, right? This slope formula that we created, where's that? Where's my slope? Right? It took the endpoints of the objects that it had, right? So essentially we got the y2, right? What was 2, right? It was the y coordinate for the second point. Then we got y1, which is the y coordinate for the first coordinate. And that's where the math is coming from, right? We got both these objects, we got both their y's, and we subtracted one y from the other one. Then we did the exact same thing for the x coordinate. We got the x coordinate for point 2, right? And then we got the x coordinate for point 1 and subtracted them. And then whatever results we got from both of these, we divided them, right? That gave us our slope. Both of these line segments need to have the slope formula so we can figure out what slope is for what, right? When we ran the slope formula on the line segment 2, it took the x and y coordinates from the points that it had saved as data members, right? So both of these need to have the slope formula. They both have to run it. Now, when we are doing the if parallel to, right, we have a line segment calling this, right? Essentially, we are using line segment 1, right? Let's say line segment 1 is trying to see, hey, am I parallel to this other line segment? Like, or do we share similarities? Are we similar? Right? Well, I'm going to go ahead and use my if parallel to method that I have. That parallel method takes in a different object, the object that you're trying to compare to, right? Which was line segment 2, right? So That's why on its parallel to, we had to grab the slope for both of them. For the one that's calling it, which is why we use self.slope, right? And then we had to grab the slope for the one that they were passing in as an argument. And then we compare it. Does that make sense, guys? Yes, no, I need some response here, guys.
Sorry,
I-
I'm eating. Yes, it does. Sorry.
Anybody else, someone who's not understanding it, I want to make sure that we're on the same page here of why we did what we did, right? Of why this object is taking in a different object as a parameter, and why we had to grab the object within that object, and why we were just diving so deep into different objects and their methods, right? This looked very confusing at first, right? The slope one, because we're doing self dot endpoint two object dot get y coordinate. And then when we did it all within the same method right here, we were going even deeper, right? It was just very confusing. What we ended up doing is we split the load, right? We made sure that we just added the slope as a method itself per what direction we're supposed to tell us, but we didn't read it to the very end. The line segment should have a method that checks its own slope, which made it easier, right? Because that way we just call that method on the line segment that's calling the is parallel to method, and then we use the slope method again on the object is taken in within the is parallel to method. Does that make sense, guys? Somebody else besides Kim. I want to make sure that we're understanding this.
Yes, I mean, it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I think, and this is just for me speaking. I think it was the wording when it came to the slope that had caused the miss, understanding.
I
I think
agree.
when it was saying two points, and so yeah,
I mean, you saw me. I was trying to like kind of decipher it
yeah,
live in front of you guys. I'm like, okay, what is it really asking for me, right? And my mind was going like 100 miles per hour, and I'm like, I got all these things in my head, but I was trying to like, all right, calm down, let's figure out what exactly is asking from me. And then even at one point, I got confused. I'm asking you guys for feedback, right? Because sometimes when we're coding, we get tunnel vision, right? We get so like we don't see things, we miss specific things, like for the fact that I missed the fact that it was asking us to create a slope method, right? So I ask you guys for feedback. Sometimes somebody else from the outside can see better than what you can see when you're inside, right? But I know the wording could be a little difficult. What helps, I don't know if you guys saw, you kind of have to break it off into pieces. Like, okay, what is it asking for me? Let's do this one first. I think line segment one, and then okay, I think we need the second line segment. Both of these need to get endpoints, and I was just trying to visually understand what it was asking for me, right? Because it's throwing all these verbiage, line segment and slope, and bro, I haven't done math. Like the only math I did in the last 8 years was like demolition calculations, and that was like basic math. This is like I don't know what's like how to calculate slope, dude. So especially when you're working with all this terminology. By the way, not all software engineering requires math, so don't feel like, oh no, this is what my life's gonna be like. No, not everything. It depends what you do. If you're doing like video games and you're working on the physics of like the bullets, yeah, maybe it probably needs to do some math. But like if you're just making the homepage for some website that sells mittens, then you're good, right? But okay, let's go ahead and close this chapter. All right, I'm sick of points and segments. So let's finish off with the line segment one, and then we're gonna move on to the streaming guide.py. This was a little bit more interesting. And it's probably something familiar to you guys because you guys use this every single day. So it's not gonna be as foreign as working with segments and points. All right, so let's go ahead and open up the lesson for that. If you guys ever want me to draw other stuff for you guys, if you can't like understand it, if you want to see it drawn out, let me know and I'll gladly use it. That's a skylightraw.com. It's a pretty cool website. I don't know if you guys have other whiteboard websites like that, but it's nice to kind of just visualize stuff and see what stuff is doing. So let's close it off line segment and open up streaming guide. All right. We're gonna focus the remainder of the class on this assignment, right? It should be an empty file, but essentially what you guys are gonna be doing right now is writing streaming guides that have services, right? And you kind of already see right off the bat what it's asking for you, like with the orange highlighting, get title, get genre, get director, right? Writing a class name streaming service that has two data members, name and catalog, right? The catalog being the movies that it has. Add streaming service, delete streaming service, where to watch a movie. Very similar to the line segment, it should be in chronological order. So if you guys start from top and just work your way through the README, just start creating the classes as it's instructing you. You guys shouldn't have too much of an issue. At the very bottom, you should see an example of how your code might be used. We see here they're instantiating 4 different movies, movie 1 through 4, and they're passing a title of the movie, the genre, whether it's comedy, horror, whatever. It looks like probably the director, and then the year of release, right? And then they create a streaming service here, stream service 1. They called it Netflix. Wow. And then they add movies to that streaming service. So what you guys are going to be doing here is essentially trying to replicate what a modern day Netflix is kind of doing in the background, right? Whether it's your Netflix or for my oldies, Blockbuster. But give it a try. We're gonna do it here. I am available for questions if you guys have any. So don't hesitate to ask if you guys are getting stuck. Okay. What was not? All right. So for the recording, we're gonna go ahead and start our streaming guide.py. The first step was to create our class, which is movie, and it took in 4 different parameters: title, genre, director, and year. We have to go ahead and assign these bad boys to private data members. So self._title is equal to title. And we're gonna go ahead and do that for every single data member that's added here, except our year, which we're gonna see if we can wrap around a int wrapper, which we can. I don't know why it didn't let me do it there. All right, so we're gonna wrap around int to ensure that whenever they give us something, it actually converts it to an integer. All right, specifically because it told us about it. But usually you do want to add some ways to keep people from giving it the wrong input. If not, you tend to get an error as well, right? So if I were to try to declare or instantiate a movie class and I pass in a string here, it would tell me that one of the arguments I passed in is of type integer, not string. So we create our init method to initialize our class, and that's supposed to have get methods for each of the data members, right? Get title, get genre, get director, and get year. I'm not going to talk about those. They're pretty self-explanatory. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull them out. Get title, return self._title. Define get genre, return self._genre. Define get director, return self.director, and then finally get year, right? Pretty straightforward. So we got our title, genre, director, and year get methods. That way they don't access our data members directly and break something. Next, we have to write a class named streaming service that has 2 data members, right? The name and catalog. And what I'm gonna do here is something a little bit more simple. So if you guys remember when we talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we did what we call a separation of concerns, right? HTML was in its own file. We had the JavaScript in its own, as well as the CSS, and then we linked them together. So you don't have to do it, but I'm going to show you how that works, right? So essentially, within my streaming guide folder, I'm going to create different files. I want it to be called movie.py. I'm gonna leave the streaming guide as the main.py, the main folder that keeps everything together. And then I'm going to create the streaming service. So streaming service.py. Right. And that way we can see how that's going to work together once we complete all our classes and how we can utilize them in different files, right? So I have movie.py, which is where I'm going to go ahead and put my movie class. And this is going to come into play later once we work on our Space Invaders, right? Because we're going to have different classes. And when you try to make all the classes and then call them out in the same main.py, it's going to get very confusing to see where like the main loop of your program is at. So we declare the movie class within the movie.py. And then in the streaming service.py, I'm going to create my streaming service. And this is also how you're going to do the assessment. You're going to be expected to create different files that hold their individual class so you guys can import them and use them, right? So this is just good practice. So in here, I'm going to create my streaming service class, define an init method, taking self, and it's supposed to have two data members, name and catalog. The catalog is a dictionary of movies with the titles as the keys and the movie objects as the corresponding values. You can assume there aren't any movies with the same title. The stream class should have an init method that takes the name as an argument and assigns it to the data member. But the catalog data member should be initialized to an empty dictionary. So it shouldn't take a dictionary as an argument. The only argument it should take will be the name of the streaming service, right? So it should just be name. So self._name is equal to name. And then we're going to do self.catalog is equal to open and close curly brackets, right? That's our empty dictionary. Now, good rule of thumb when you guys are creating stuff like this, make a little note of what the key value pairs are because you're gonna get confused, right? So going back to the instructions, it says that the title should be keys and the movie's objects as the corresponding value. So key is equal to movie title, and then value is equal to movie objects, right? So if at any point you forget what the heck is within this dictionary, just come back here, check your notes, right? And you guys should make that kind of like a habit whenever you're creating some of these dictionaries and lists, make notes so you know what's in there, right? Especially when you're working with dictionaries that are holding other objects as like values, or even imagining like a dictionary that holds a list of dictionaries that have other objects, it can get very complex very quickly. So just add some notes here to ensure that you stay on track with what is what. All right, so we create our init method, and then we're supposed to create get methods for each of the data members, get name and get catalog. So define get name, self, return self.name, define get catalog, and return self._catalog. Right, still pretty standard so far. Next is a method named add movie that takes a movie object as an argument and adds it to the catalog, right? So for this is the first actual method where our streaming service is actually doing something besides just get methods. So we're going to define add movie, have itself, and then it's supposed to take a movie object as an argument, right? So movie object, right? Make sure you guys put movie object because then you guys will get confused too, right? If you just put movie, you might think it's title and then it's all messed up. All right, so it takes in a movie object, right? And then it adds as an argument and it adds it to the catalog, right? So we should be doing something like self._catalog, right? And then looking back at the node that we created next to our catalog, how are we supposed to assign it, right? We're supposed to put the movie title within here and then assign the actual movie object as the value. Well, we know that we already created our movie class. So let's check out the movie class. What does it look like? Well, we have this method that it's called get title that should return to us the title. So because it is an object, we should be able to use the method that it comes with. Well, my streaming service.py is independent. It doesn't know what movie object is, right? And we might get an error here that says like, it does not recognize it or movie object or get title is not defined. So what we're going to do is up here, we're going to add some space and we're going to do from movie import movie. right? So what this is saying is from movie, which is a file, right? Or in this case, it's called a module. I want to import movie. Notice the capitalization, right? The class is capitalized, which is why it's able to identify what is what, right? Typically, when you import a module or a file, you tell it from where you want to import it and then what you want to import, right? Uh, it knows where to find movie because it's all within the same directory. It's going to check the directory that it's in. The moment you start nesting stuff with like different directories, like different folders, right? Remember, you guys recall we can use folders and directories interchangeably. The moment you start nesting directories, you're gonna have to start actually adding some functionality within here, like adding a forward slash or dot forward slash to tell it, hey, I'm either above or below where this directory is located at. But because it's all within the same directory, we don't have to add any kind of path. We should just be able to add from movie, import movie, right? Because it's all in the same directory, so it's going to check the main directory that it's within, right? And then we import the class that we want. We could, if we wanted to, just say import movie, right? And what's gonna do, it's gonna import, is it not import? Yeah, it is, module movie, yeah. It's gonna import the entire file, right? If this file had multiple classes, methods, and functions, by doing import movie, it's going to give you access to everything within that document inside of streaming service. And we don't necessarily want to do that, right? So right now, it's just good practice to add from movie, import movie, to specify what you want to import. Because when you're actually working with big files with multiple methods and data and functions, you don't want to just give people access to everything, right? Just get what you need, right? Because it's gonna have to run through all that and import it all. It's just more data that you don't need, right? So for movie, just import movie. Now, because the movie class has been imported within streaming service, we should have access to the methods that that class has. So we should be able to do movie object dot get title, right? And notice it's gonna recognize it, right? I didn't get some like white line. It says function. It knows what it is, and it's gonna recognize it, and we can use it effectively. If we didn't have this, there might be a white name to this. Let's see. There it is. Get title. Hover over it. Oh, I guess it's recognizing it. That's weird. Huh. It normally wouldn't, but still is added from movie, import movie. It's funny because whenever you don't do it and you actually need to use it, you're gonna get an error. I promise you. It happens to me all the time. Like, oh, why isn't it working? Well, because it doesn't know what the heck you're talking about, right? But from movie, import movie. If you went back to your movie.py file and you try to use something from the streaming service, and you do from streaming service import streaming service, you're gonna get an issue. Why is that? Because they're both importing each other. So make sure you're careful of how the imports are linked, because you might have linking issues, right? So just keep in mind what files is importing what, so you know where to get access from, right? But yeah, so we're gonna import our movie, and now we have access to that method. So whenever we use the add movie method that streaming service has, it's going to assign something on the catalog. The key will be whatever movie title returns from that movie object that's passed within it. And we're supposed to assign the entire object itself as a value, right? We annotated that earlier of how that's supposed to be formatted, so we know we're not gonna get confused. Awesome. So that takes care of that method. Next method is to create a delete movie method that takes a movie title as an argument, and if that movie is in the catalog, removes it. Right? So we're gonna go ahead, come down here. Define delete movie, takes in self, and then it's supposed to take in what? A movie title. Right? And now we have to add some kind of functionality here. Well, where is our movies located at? Well, they're located within our catalog. So we need to go into our catalog, look for this movie title, and then if we find it, remove it. So we're gonna have to start looping through our catalog, and you can either loop through it or you can use the in method, right? We can use the in method, so we can say if movie title in self dot underscore catalog, right? Because self dot underscore catalog, we know that's a dictionary of movies. So if the movie title is in there, right, it's gonna check the keys. Hey, is this movie title within catalog? Well, if it is, I want you to delete self dot underscore catalog and then use the bracket notation with the movie title within it. All right, so if it exists in there, it should be able to grab it and delete it. Right? This all comes from the methods of how to access your dictionaries in Python and how to delete stuff, right? This was explained during the PowerPoint lecture. Cool. All right, next is lastly, write a class named streaming guide that has one data member, a list of streaming services, and it should have, we see here, multiple different things. Okay. We can go ahead and just use our streaming guide that we had earlier, streaming guide.py, to do the streaming guide. It's already named. So let's do that. So within our streaming guide.py, I'm going to create the class streaming guide. It needs an init method to initialize itself and taking self. And it has one data member, a list of streaming services. It should have an init method that takes no arguments. Okay, so no arguments. We can leave that just at self. And then it initializes the data member to an empty list, right? So the data member, which is streaming services, should just be an empty list. All right, so we'll do self dot underscore streaming services is equal to open and close bracket. All right. Once again, an init method that takes no arguments and initiates or initializes the data member to an empty list. All right, this list is a list of streaming services. So pretty self-explanatory. Okay. All right, next is going to be a method called add streaming service that takes a streaming service object as an argument and adds it to the list. So define add streaming service. If I need to slow down, please say so. I tend to talk very fast. It's sometimes too fast that I might not pronounce my words right. Add streaming service. It's going to take itself like every other method, and it takes in a streaming service object as an argument, right? So streaming service object and adds it to the list. So our list is up here on line 4 within the self dot underscore streaming services data member. So we should do something as simple as self dot underscore streaming services dot append streaming service object, right? How do we add things to a list in Python using the dot append method? Boom. Next, a method named delete streaming service that takes the name of a streaming service as an argument, and if it's in the list, removes it. So define delete streaming service. It takes in self like every other method, and then it takes in a streaming service name. All right, so streaming service name. All right. Now, it takes the name of a streaming service as an argument, and if it's in the list, removes it. All right. So we can do for streaming service in self dot underscore streaming services, right? We're essentially looping through our streaming services list. Let's actually add that to it, list here, so we know what it is. List, and then list, streaming services list. All right, so for streaming service in self dot underscore streaming services list, if streaming service dot get name is equal to streaming service name, then we want to do something. Where does this come from? Get name. Well, as you recall, this is a list of streaming services, right? So it should be something like this. We should add a little note, right? Streaming service objects, right? It is an object. It is a list of objects. So therefore, these objects probably have methods, right? We can go back to our streaming service, and it does have a method called get name, and that's what we're going to be using. Actually, let's go ahead and import that too, just in case. From streaming service, import streaming service, right? So we can have access to the methods. There's no issue there. So as we loop through this list of objects of streaming services, we're going to check the name by using the get name method. And then we're going to compare it to the name of the streaming service we're trying to delete that was passed in as an argument. All right, so if it's in there, then what do I want to do? Self._ streaming services list .remove, and then remove that streaming service. Right? Just remove that bad boy. So far, so good, guys. All right. Next, a method named where to watch movie that takes a movie title as an argument and returns a list. So define where to watch movie self, and it takes a movie title as an argument and returns a list. Right? Element 0 of the list is a string that is a concatenation of the name and year of the movie with a year in parentheses. Right? With the rest of the list being the names of streaming services showing that movie. For example, the list that is returned might look like this. And we see a list here. The first one in the index is, the title, which is King Kong, followed by a concatenation of the name of that movie as well as the year. And then we see HBO Max, FX, and Canopy, right? Those are the 3 streaming services that it belongs to. So how do we do that? Well, we have to loop through our streaming services, right? Whether it's Netflix, right? Blockbuster, whatever we created. And when we loop through our streaming services, we got to check each catalog from every single service. And then check if that movie is in that catalog, right? So it should start something like this. Well, where is our streaming services? Well, we know they're in this list up here within the streaming guide. So it should be for streaming service in self._ streaming services list, right? Remember, this is a list of streaming service objects, right? What are these streaming services? They look like this. This is the object that are within that list. Each streaming service has a catalog, and within this catalog, we have movies, titles as keys, and movies as objects as your values, right? So we have to loop through all the lists or the entirety of our list of streaming services and grab every catalog, right? So as we loop through our streaming services, I'm going to create a variable called catalog, right? And this is going to be where I'm going to store temporarily the catalog that belongs to the streaming service that we're currently working on. Streaming service dot get catalog. Right? As I loop through this list, it's giving me objects of all my streaming services, right? These objects have the method called get catalog, which will return to me the catalog within that object. So that's what I'm doing. I'm grabbing that catalog and temporarily saving it in this variable catalog, right? As this for loop is going and it gets to the next streaming service, it's going to recreate that variable and resave that catalog for the new streaming service that we're currently working on. So once we get the catalog, I'm going to create a new variable called result. And within this variable is where I'm going to store the movie title, right? If that movie title is within here. This is also where I'm going to create the answer that I'm going to give my user, right? This is where I'm going to create that string for index 0 with the services that it belongs to, right? it might make sense to probably add the result outside of here. Let's look at the movie. Good genre, good year. Okay. So it might make sense to probably put the result up here, right? Because as we're looping through, we should be adding movies to it, right? Or what we can do is we could check whether it's empty or not, right? So as we loop through that list, we're gonna create the result, right? Let's see if this works. We can obviously just come back and adjust it. We're gonna see if that movie title is currently within the working streaming service that we are looping through. So if movie title in catalog, right? What catalog? Well, remember, as we're looping through this list of services, we're assigning that catalog within this catalog variable. So if it's within there, what we're going to do is we're going to format our result. So we'll check if it's empty. If the length of the result is equal to 0, then we're going to add the title as well as the year, right? If it's not empty, that means that all we should be doing is adding the name of the streaming service, right? So let's get some code in here. So if the result is 0, that means we have yet to find the movie in any of our catalogs, right? We have yet to find it. So we need to find it first in a catalog. Once we've worked in that catalog that it's located in, then we can actually save something in that list. So if it's 0, and we've already found it at this point, then we should do result.append, and we're going to format index 0, which is supposed to be a string, right? It's the title, so it should be movie title, curly brackets, right? Space, and then it should be an open and close parentheses like we see here. And within this open and close parentheses, we should have the year. So to get the year, we'll do catalog. We'll add the movie title within here, which will return to us an object, right? How does that look like? Right, once we add the title to the catalog by using the key, it should return to us an object. So this method right here returns to us an object. And we know that the movie title object has different methods: get title, get genre, get director, get year. That's going to allow us to use the get year method that this movie has, right? So this right here within these curly brackets will return to us the year of that movie title formatted within these parentheses. Cool. So that formatted what index 0 is supposed to be. Pause. Give me a second. I think my dog's getting to something. All right. I'm sorry for that interruption. Let's continue. So we formatted the string that's supposed to be on index 0. And we only did that because we have yet to add anything to the result, right? That list is still empty. We have yet to format that string that needs to be added to our result. So once we first found it for the very first time within any of these catalogs, we're gonna go ahead and create that because now we have access to the year of the movie title the user is requesting, right? Afterwards, we're going to also add the name of the streaming service that we found it in, right? Notice that the second index is HBO Max because they probably found King Kong within HBO Max. So whatever streaming service that we're currently looped on, we need to add that to our list. So it should also be result.append. And then we're going to do streaming service dot get name, right? And now the result should look something similar to this. You should have like King Kong with the year formatted in it, and it should have the streaming service that we found it in, right? Very similar to how the result is showing us. Now, we're only doing this if our result list is a length of 0. That means we have yet to find it. We found it for the first time at this service, so we're going to add it in there. Now, in the event we've already looped through it once and we found it and we already did all this formatting, then what we should be doing is just adding the name of the catalog that we found it in again, right? Because multiple streaming services can have the same movie, right? For those of you guys like, I watch kids movies because I got a kid, right? I've seen Mario like 50 freaking times. But I can find it in multiple different streaming services. So I might have found it in Netflix for the very first time, but as I look at other streaming services, it might be in there too, right? So if I've already found it once and I've already formatted the name with a year, then I should just be adding the name of that streaming service that I found it in again. Get name, right? Awesome. All right. Next. Now, in the event that that movie does not exist, right? We've looped through the entirety of our services throughout all the entirety of the list. We've looked through all the services. We have yet to find this movie. Well, you know what? Like, let's say that new Deadpool and Wolverine movie isn't out yet. Well, we're probably not gonna find it in any of these streaming services. So, if we don't find it, then at the end we should just return result. If result, else none. What does that mean? So the logic behind line 26 is if result actually has result, right? If result is result, then I want to return that, right? So return result if result. It's pretty much saying, hey, if result is not empty, right? That means you found this movie within the streaming services. Then I want you to return to me whatever result has, right? Because obviously you found it somewhere. You formatted the title with the year, and you've added the service that you found it, right? That's what return result if result means. The else statement is pretty much saying if you have not found it, result is empty. You never found it within any service catalog, so you've never formatted the result list. Then I just want you to return none, right? And that's the logic behind line 26. It's pretty much an if else statement, right? If result is actually equal to something with result, then return to me the result. Else, return to me none, right? It's an if else statement written in one line, right? So a streaming guide will have a list of streaming services, and the streaming service will have a dictionary of movies. The where to watch movie method needs to use this nested information to determine which streaming services, if any, have the desired movie available. Here's a simple example of how your code might be used. I'm going to go ahead and copy this so I don't make up movies from thin air and waste your time. We should be able to do copy and paste here. Notice what's happening here. See squiggly lines? Why am I getting squiggly lines? When I'm trying to create the movie.
You're in the wrong class, or
Is it
doesn't-
because it's capital?
No. I'm calling the class movie correctly. That's how we created it. But where am I? I'm in streaming guide.
You need to import it.
I haven't imported it, right?
Okay.
Now we're getting errors. Earlier they didn't want to give me a freaking error, but now you see that I'm getting an issue here. It doesn't recognize what movie is, right? Movie is not defined. So up here, I'm gonna do from movie import movie, right? Because I'm trying to create a movie class here, but it wasn't allowing me because they didn't know what movie was. It wasn't defined within this file. But now that I import it, notice that the squiggly line is gone, and now I hover over it, and it's showing me how my class is built. It knows that it takes title, genres, directors, and year, right? That's why you have to import it. Even though earlier you saw it was giving me like no issue, the moment I tried to instantiate that class, it had no idea what the heck I was talking about, right? So this will make 4 different movies. We already see it pre-made, The Seventh Seal, Home Alone. I love Home Alone. I know some of y'all can relate. Little Woman and Galaxy Quest, right? Now, let me go ahead and copy the streaming service because I don't want to do this from scratch. Paste. Stream service 1, I'm not getting any errors, right? Why is that? Because I imported streaming service earlier, so I'm able to create the class. I'm able to add movies, but let's see if it's actually doing it, right? Let's comment this out. And let's print out stream service 1. Let's also print out a movie. Print movie 1. What the heck? Oh, I'm in the wrong directory. It was giving me slopes, man. CD streaming guide. Okay, Python. We are in the streaming guide.py. All right, I ran it. Notice that it's printing out the movie object and it's also printing out the streaming service. So it created the streaming service effectively. We did add a movie. Let's see if that movie did here. Well, what does our streaming service have to show us? It has get catalog, right? So it should be able to show us its catalog. If we do print stream service 1 dot get catalog, and we see here, awesome. We see the dictionary, the catalog being printed out. Remember that the key that we assigned it was the title of our movie, and the value was supposed to be the object itself. So it's printing out that object, right? So add movie is working, right? We're making progress here, guys. Let's go ahead and delete that movie from the catalog, right? We added the movie, but let's do stream service 1 dot delete movie, and it's supposed to take a title. We'll give it Home Alone, and then let's print out the catalog again. See what that looks like. Awesome, right? The first time that we printed out was when we added the movie, then we deleted it right afterwards and printed out again. It's empty. The delete catalog is working. All right, awesome. That was the Netflix one. Now let's try something a little bit more complex. I want to see the result, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste everything here to see if the result one for the final method that we just created is working. We see they use word to watch method, but at any point, is it printing anything out? It is not. So let's go ahead and print it out at the very end. Print search results. And we run it, and we get Little Woman 2019 Disney, right? Disney Plus. You can guess what that is, right? And let's make sure, is that the only one we added, the Little Woman movie? Well, we created the Little Woman, that's movie 3. We added it only to the streaming service Disney Plus. Let's add it to the Hulu one. All right, make sure it's actually giving us all these streaming services. Dot add movie 3, and print it out. It's not working. Why do you guys think it's not working? I already know why, but see if you guys can figure it out. Why is my where to watch movie method not working? It's a very obvious reason. It added Disney Plus, but it did not show me that it was added within Netflix. Oh, wrong. I didn't notice this. Look at this, line 53, delete streaming service, we deleted it. So it was never added within there. Let's run it again. It's not working. The streaming service is on there, but the Hula streaming service is not being displayed. So there's still an issue. Why is that? Look at my code, guys. What's wrong with my code? The result isn't being formatted, right? Right, it's only adding one streaming service. But what happened to the Hula streaming service? Okay, nobody has an answer. All right, we start this for loop, right? We do for streaming service in self dot underscore streaming service list. We're looping through a list of different streaming service objects, and we declare the catalog and result variable within this for loop. So let's say it finds our movie within the first streaming service within its catalog. It formats it. It's done looking through that streaming service. It's done looking through the Hula one. It loops again for the second time to go check Netflix, right, or Disney Plus. What happens to the result that we just formatted?
It gets set back to nothing.
It gets set back to nothing, right? Because every time that it loops through, result is equal to an empty list. Sure, I may have formatted it already once the previous time we looped through the first time, right? But the second time we loop around, it gets reset to an empty list. So maybe not a smart idea to have result right here, right? Maybe it's better we just set it out here. And then we loop through, and then we can do the comparison. Let's see if that works. Wow, it does work. Little Woman 2019, it has Hula and Disney Plus, right? It was being reset every time we did that for loop, and I did that on purpose. Hint, hint. Sure, right? But yeah, that's what was happening, right? And that's why it's important that you pay attention to where you are putting your variables, where you're declaring stuff, right? Every time that for loop does, if you declare a variable in the middle of a for loop while you're looping through, it's going to re-declare that variable every single time it loops through, constantly reset it to the first time you declared it. So if you decide to update it, it's going to reset, right? And we did that with catalog, right? While we looped through each streaming service, we grabbed the individual catalog for that streaming service, and we knew that as we loop through into the next catalog, that catalog was being reset to the current streaming service that we were working on, right? And then right afterwards, I added a result, but no one caught that. All right, I'm gonna stop it here, guys. It is 8:54. I'm gonna leave the last 5 minutes for any kind of questions you guys might have. I'm gonna stop the recording now.